Welcome to the Divine Identity Podcast. In this explainer, we are exploring theologian and teacher Igor Pogoda's article, What is Time? Life, Creation, and the Urgency of Today. Time is, well, it's something that literally shapes every single dimension of our human existence, right? We're always counting years, measuring our growth, feeling the intense pressure of looming deadlines, and just watching life move steadily forward. But have you ever actually stopped to ask why we experience time the way we do? And honestly, more importantly, how does all of that relate to the very nature of God? We are going to break down this profound theology today and make these incredibly complex ideas super accessible. Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. First, the central question of time. Second, how God has life in himself. Third, creation, succession, and becoming. Fourth, sin and deathward duration. And finally, life and the urgency of today. Let's jump right in.
Section 1, the central question of time.
Okay, so let's dive into this by clearing up some pretty common misconceptions right off the bat. Time is not some invisible container that God built and then just placed the universe into. It's not an independent object. It's not an external force pushing on us. And it is definitely not just a human invention. I mean, sure, we invented the clocks, the calendars, the hours, and the years to measure things, but we didn't invent the actual temporal reality that those tools are measuring. Time actually comes into actuality with creation itself. And this brings us to a really brilliant point, basically the core mystery we need to solve today. Why does creation experience time while God does not? Scripture points the answer to this question directly toward the concept of life, specifically the profound, unbridgeable distinction between the Creator and what He creates.
That brings us to Section 2, God has life in himself.
Look, to understand time, we actually have to first understand timelessness. Jesus identified the very foundation of God's eternity in John 5:26, stating simply, "The Father has life in himself." This is the absolute controlling truth here. See, God doesn't receive life. He's not preserving it, replenishing it, or drawing it from some outside source. His existence doesn't have a start date, and it's certainly not moving toward an expiration date. So the crucial takeaway is that God is timeless precisely because his life is completely underived and inexhaustible. He isn't just living for some immeasurably long duration. Because think about it, endless duration would still be measured by time. No, he is fundamentally timeless. To really grasp this timeless creator, it's fascinating to look at how Igor Pogoda breaks down what Scripture reveals as aspectival monotheism. Now, Scripture doesn't present God as this vague, abstract cloud floating out there somewhere. It reveals one personal God with inseparable aspects. His soul is his personal conscious I, the one who actually thinks and wills. His form is his own personal living structure, the spiritual reality through which he acts and speaks. And his spirit is his inner, underived life. Now, to be totally clear, these are not three different persons, they aren't detachable parts, and they aren't temporary modes. They are real, simultaneous, and absolutely inseparable aspects of the one divine being. All right, moving to Section 3, creation, succession, and becoming. So when God creates, he brings forth creation in an ordered succession in and through his form. He speaks, light appears, land emerges. It's one thing following another. But there is a massive distinction we have to make here. Succession is not time. Succession just identifies the ordered arrangement of God's creative acts. God's soul didn't pass from ignorance to knowledge. He remained the exact same timeless divine being while creating. If succession were the exact same thing as time, well then God's ordered creative action would actually make the timeless creator temporal. But it doesn't do that at all. Time belongs to the realities that come into being without possessing God's underived life in themselves. Scripture actually marks this boundary so beautifully through the language of coming into being. Take a look at the Hebrew word wahi, which literally translates to became or came to pass. In the context of creation, this specific word marks the realized boundary, the exact, literal threshold where something that did not previously exist suddenly becomes concretely present and enters temporal existence. So, we are left with this absolute, fundamental contrast. God is, while creation becomes. God is the eternal acting subject. He literally never comes into being. Creation, on the other hand, receives a beginning. And that word, became, it doesn't mean creation was placed into some independently existing container of time. It marks the very commencement of a created result. Genesis 2:7 captures this emergence perfectly. God forms the physical constituent from the dust, gives the spiritual constituent of the breath of life, and, just as Genesis states, the man became a living soul.
The physical and spiritual unite, and one concrete human soul being emerges. That key word became marks the exact beginning of the man and the commencement of his temporal existence. Which brings us to a clear, formal definition for our explainer today. Time is the temporal condition of created reality. Why? Because what becomes does not possess God's timeless life intrinsically. Created things have a beginning. Their existence is received. It's not underived. They simply don't have that enduring, self-existent power within themselves.
Let's transition over to section 4, sin and death wart duration, because we really need to see how the fall changed things.
Now, there is a critical theological nuance here that a lot of people miss. Sin did not create time. Adam was actually already temporal before he sinned because, well, he had a beginning, he had a received existence. But, and this is absolutely key, he was not originally dying. The tree of life in the garden show that endless life wasn't an inherent possession of his. He had to remain connected to God's provision of life. His temporal constitution just wasn't a countdown yet.
Pogoda uses a brilliant, highly relatable analogy here to make sense of this. Think of a phone connected to a power charger. While your phone is plugged in, it operates continuously. It doesn't experience its existence as a countdown towards shutting down because its power is completely sustained by the source. But the second you disconnect it, that remaining battery suddenly becomes a finite reserve, measured in hours and minutes. Disconnecting the phone didn't invent time, right? But it did cause the remaining power to become a visible, measurable movement towards cessation.
And that analogy just perfectly illustrates what happened to humanity. When Adam sinned and turned from God, he essentially unplugged from the power source. He didn't create time, but his relationship to his temporal condition changed radically. His sustained temporal existence was transformed into mortal, deathward duration. The body began to age, strength diminished, and death became the unavoidable conclusion. Basically, time became a countdown.
Which brings us to our final part, section 5, life and the urgency of today.
Because of this mortal countdown, Scripture's central concern, the ultimate conflict of the whole story, is not actually time versus timelessness. It is life versus death. Jesus declares in John 11:25, "I am the resurrection and the life." And life here, it isn't just biological activity or a beating heart. It is the living divine reality that is intrinsic to God himself, rooted in his own inner spirit. You see, humanity's deepest problem isn't that we just need a few more years tacked onto our mortal existence. We need the life that actually overcomes death. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Through union with Jesus' death and resurrection, God gives believers a brand new, living, spiritual infrastructure. The gospel doesn't just offer an indefinite extension of our current temporal timeline. God gives the life that completely defeats the deathward condition of time. And this is exactly why the gospel carries such immense urgency. It's why Scripture constantly emphasizes the word today. Present human existence remains under mortality, steadily moving toward a very real conclusion. That's why Paul urgently declares, now is the favorable time, now is the day of salvation. The remaining duration of our mortal life is a countdown. It is neither possessed nor guaranteed by us. God is not ruled by time because he has life in himself. Creation experiences time because it became and possesses received existence. Fallen humanity experiences time as life moving toward death. That is why Scripture declares, now is the favorable time, today is the day of salvation. We've seen today that time isn't an invisible container or some sort of illusion. It is the reality of living with received existence. Knowing that our mortal time is a ticking countdown, the ultimate question the text leaves us with is this: will you receive the life that defeats death today? Thanks for exploring this profound truth with us, and keep seeking the life that overcomes time.